Welcome to the Canarian International Meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Mossy, and I am an alcoholic.
And my name is Mick, and I am an alcoholic. We're both serving as your secretaries today. Please join us in a moment's silence to remember the still suffering alcoholic, both inside and outside these rooms.
And Carol is on the preamble. There you go.
Thank you. My name's Carol and I'm an alcoholic. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. AA has no dues or fees. It is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organisation or institution. Does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. And very warm welcome goes out to any newcomers or anyone returning to Alcoholics Anonymous.
The chat is now disabled until the end of the meeting, except for the meeting hosts. If you feel the meeting security is at risk at any time during the meeting, please private message one of the co-hosts so they could check it out.
And that's it, folks. As you know, today is a Roll Timers meeting. Our speaker today is BREA from Santa Barbara. Delighted to have her here. And you have 45, 50 minutes, BREA, or just, we're not going to stop you talking. That's the way it works here.
Okay.
And so as long as you want to punish everybody, it's all good. So take it away. And it's a pleasure to have you here with us.
Mossy, thank you so much. My name is BREA and I am an alcoholic. Really wonderful to be here. Thank you for inviting me to share. I think we had talked about 2 months ago. So this has been on my calendar for a little bit. And I'm a little nervous. I've overshot the mark with caffeine. So we'll see how the next 40 minutes goes. But I'm really glad to be here and it's always an honor. You know, I used to hear people say that, especially when I was new to AA, and I just didn't understand what they were talking about. Like, why would it be an honor to be an alcoholic and talk about my misfortunes and the things that I did in the past? And my hope is that when I'm done speaking in 35 or 40 minutes, it'll be reflected just how truly grateful I am and enormously blessed. I feel like that expression is so overused, but it's very, very true in this case. Right off the top, I wanted to thank 2 of my sponsees are here, Jude from Arizona. Hi, honey. And then Lori B, who is just listening. She also lives in Santa Barbara. And I'm really grateful because I think sponsorship is one of the reasons that I would be able to credit any kind of long-term sobriety that I have is being able to pass it on to others. And you know, it's not a well-kept secret, but if you are new to AA, you know, I would have to say that sponsorship is one of the greatest privileges I have as a sober member of AA. And, you know, both Jude and Lori helped me more than I feel like I could ever help them. So tremendously grateful that you're here to support me. So I'm going to speak in a general way, what it was like, what happened and what it's like now. But just right off the top, so there's no mystery. I got sober very young. I was 16 years old. I just turned 16, actually. My sobriety date is July 14th, 1984. So, you know, I'm 57 years old. I grew up in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'll tell you a little bit about how I came to meetings and what my life is like now as well. But I don't have any siblings. My mom was a single parent, and my father was not my biological father. She had married him when I was very young. They divorced about 3 years later, but when I was 5 years old, he legally adopted me. I consider him my dad, but we were virtual strangers. And right from the jump, I just had a lot of stigma about that. I felt like, you know, if I had never met my biological father, and then the man who decided to adopt me was so little they're not interested in having a relationship with me, I must be unlovable. And that was part of my story for a long time. I have always felt like just uncomfortable, restless, irritable, and discontent, I think is what the big book talks about. And I use this expression because it really illustrates how I felt like I moved through the world. But it was as if there was a school assembly at 7:45 a.m. Everybody showed up, and then I was the person who came in at 8 o'clock and had no idea what was going on. And I felt like that all the time, sort of a day late and a dollar short. And, oftentimes I would try to pretend that I knew what was going on, which made it worse because most of the time people could really sort out that I was just flying by the seat of my pants, so to speak. But it was just my mom and I, and she was 18 years old when she got pregnant with me. I am her second biological daughter. She had a daughter at 14. And she had a lot of disadvantages. She had some pretty acute PTSD in addition to some very serious clinical depression. And so, I grew up with not a lot of support or supervision, not because she didn't care about me, but she just was very incapable. And we refer that here as being a latchkey kid. I had a key to the house. A lot of times I would come home from school and nobody would be home. And it was just really a recipe for me to get into a lot of trouble right from the jump. I started drinking and using at 11. And my first big drunk, my instinct was to get it into my body as quickly as possible. Like there was no little kind of a honeymoon period with it. I just jumped right into drugs and alcohol. And I just, it became a part-time job. If I wasn't already completely intoxicated, I was trying to find ways to get drugs and alcohol. In my case, at 11, it was a lot easier to find drugs, ironically, than it was alcohol. And, I'll talk a little bit about this more when I get to what happened and what it's like now. But I remember having a conversation with my mom after I got sober, and she said, I was obviously worried about you, but I knew things were really off the rail when you were just drinking full bottles of creme de menthe and then there's green throw up everywhere. Like, so disgusting. No one in their right mind would drink a full bottle of creme de menthe, but I also wasn't in my right mind. And, it really was the solution I've been looking for. Drugs and alcohol were the solution to my life problems. And I loved partying. There was a friend that I had who I spent a full year with. We were just joined at the hip. If one of us wasn't present, somebody would say, where's BREA or whatever, right? And I was friends with her. I just feel terrible saying this, for a full year, just so I could get drugs and alcohol from her. She wasn't a person I would have chosen to hang out with, but she always, had alcohol, and that's what I needed. And she seemed to enjoy my companionship, although it seemed like, my ulterior motives were just dead obvious. And around this time, my mom had been hospitalized for depression. The first time it happened, I didn't know that she was being hospitalized for depression. I thought she was visiting family. And so I was staying with some family friends, and she was gone for about 3 weeks. She had a suicide attempt, which I also didn't know about. I was just young, and she was trying to not scare me, really. But the second time it happened, I think she was so afraid that she was not going to survive that she took me out of school, and I went to live with some friends who lived in Los Angeles at the time. And I felt like I was really untethered, and the only thing that made sense is doing drugs and alcohol. And the literature talks about how we feel like our lives are the normal one. Literally everything is going down crashing and burning around me. And I kept thinking, you know, if I maybe just got up a little earlier in the day, I could kind of get ahead of things, try to keep all the balls in the air. Or, you know, if I just, you know, if I got some little scam to work out, it would all just smooth out and it would be okay. I was a very poor student. I still can't believe I actually graduated from high school. And I burned out pretty much all of my friends and family here in town. And this was the time where my mom said I would have to go live with my father if I didn't go seek drug and alcohol counseling. I was just completely out of control. I would disappear for days at a time. At the time, we were living in a house, and it's the house on the block where you know bad stuff is going down. You know, it's just the yard is unkempt. There's broken down cars everywhere. People are coming, going at all times of the night. The police are called. We were selling drugs to the junior high school students around the corner. I don't know what the UK version of that is. It's like, it's not primary and it's not secondary. It's right in between. I don't know if you guys have that. Anyway, so I agreed to go to counseling because I didn't want to live with my father. We were virtual strangers at the time. He would call me about once a year and ask me how old I was. And my mom forced me to go stay a week out of each summer to visit him. And he usually worked that entire week. And so I would watch TV and get into his bar cart and drink as much as I could get my hands on. So I started going to this drug and alcohol counseling. It was a basically an organization that was designed to help at-risk teens, which I certainly was. And I went every single week, and I lied and said that I was able to stay sober for that week. And, you know, there were plenty of people in my life who were concerned about me, but letting down this woman in particular, who was so proud of me. You know, I'd tell her I stayed sober for the week and I didn't pick up at all. And it just made me feel terrible. And that was kind of the first time I really had any remorse about the drugs and the alcohol. I talk about drugs just because I smoked my alcohol, so to speak. And it really, really brought me back to drinking every single time. I really couldn't have one without the other. And to pretend that I had any semblance of control with either substance, either drinking or doing drugs, was just, yeah. I like to call myself a medicine cabinet warrior. Go over to people's homes and see what kind of drugs they might have in their medicine cabinet. I don't know what the equivalent of that is in the UK, but I was telling my home group the other day that I'd actually found a bar of laxatives. It looks like a chocolate bar, and I ate the entire thing thinking it's a really strange place to keep chocolate. And then, of course, later on, I was like, oh no, I made a really bad decision. Very uncool. But did it stop me? No, it did not stop me. I think that, what is it, the definition of insanity? People say it's doing the same thing, expecting different results. But sadly, what I found is in my experience, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing, expecting the same result. You know, I just going to it again and again. So what happened during this time was I had sort of a lifelong friend. We've been friends since we were 5. And she and her family moved to Los Angeles from Santa Barbara. I've lived here all my life. I've traveled a little bit, but I've never lived anywhere different. And so this was the family that I went and stayed with when my mom was hospitalized for the last time. And she lived a long, full life after that. But it was not without some, you know, it was, my heart just went out to her. She was in chronic pain. Her depression was very, very great. And, you know, the other thing was we just didn't have a lot of money. So I just had a ton of shame. I just felt like everybody seemed to have these really wonderful lives. And I was just doing everything I could to just barely break even. So I was a sophomore in high school, second year secondary, and was maybe late winter, early spring, and it was my health class actually. And I was 15 years old, and was a panel of Alcoholics Anonymous speakers that my teacher invited in to come share. And we had speakers come in on all different topics. And I still, to this day, I think about the forethought of this teacher inviting 3 AA speakers, you know, and that's when I believe I had my very first spiritual experience. And up to that point, I had very little religious experience. I'd never really been to church, but this was around the time that my mom decided to start attending synagogue. She was Jewish, I guess, but never really leaned into that. And it sort of coincided when I was bottoming out with drugs and alcohol. And you know, the thing about church, if you're Jewish, is synagogues on Friday nights, which is decidedly inconvenient because I'm sitting there next to my mom knowing that everybody else is out there having a good time. I mean, maybe they were and maybe they weren't. That's also the hallmark of my alcoholism, is that I just tend to kind of make stuff up about what people are doing or thinking. But it was really inconvenient. So these 3 men come in. They're actually young. They're in their early 20s. They were university students. And they came in, they talked about Alcoholics Anonymous, what it was like, what happened, and what their lives were like then. And 2 things happened. The first thing was that I had this thought that this is what's wrong with me. Like I was never, I drank and used much differently from the people that I hung out with, but I never really realized it was a problem until that moment. You know, that the common factor and all the stuff that seemed to be happening to me was drugs and alcohol, but I could never put it together. I never put the 2 things together. So I had the thought of that's what's wrong with me. And the other thought I had was, I mean, it just took so much work being me. You know, the amount of, it was, you know, I was telling one set of friends lies and another set of friends different lies, and I couldn't keep anything straight. I mean, I literally could have laid my head down and slept for 12 hours. It was just, it took a lot of energy to sustain partying and getting as much drugs and alcohol as I could. And the other, so this was the spiritual experience that I had, was that I just knew that I was not going to survive to see my 18th birthday. There was just no question. And a lot of my friends at the time, I don't know how common this is in other parts of the world, but in the States, it was very common for teenagers to be, I hate to use the word abducted, but you know, basically coerced into going into some sort of a rehab, usually in the woods or whatever. And, you know, a lot of my friends were just getting picked up in the middle of the night and taken off to rehab. You know, a lot of my girlfriends were getting pregnant at 14 and 15. And I just, you know, I just knew it was a matter of time. And there was something really sad that I actually didn't care. I didn't really care if I continued to live, because I wasn't really living. And I was finding myself in a lot of really dangerous situations for a young woman. So when these 3 men were done, I approached one of them and I said, "What do you do when you're lying about how much drugs and alcohol you're doing?" And he just very nicely, he said, "You know, I might just suggest that you try to go to a meeting." And then he gave me his phone number, which I have to tell you, I completely misconstrued. I thought he was like really into me. So I took his phone number, got home from school that day. I called him and he said, "Okay, I'll pick you up at 7:30 tonight." You know, I knew we were going to a meeting, but I was like, okay, is it a date? What should I wear? Like, I just, you know, we don't get here because we're well, right? So he shows up and there's a woman in the car and I'm like, well, okay. It's weird, but all right. And then, you know, later on I learned that that's how you do 12-step work, you know, is that, you know, you don't ever go alone. And, you know, in this case, he was very respectful, and he brought a woman who was young, who he thought I would, you know, relate to. So I went to my first meeting, and people were so welcoming. I was truly blown away, the kindness of people. And, you know, I got tons of phone numbers. That was back before cell phones, back in the dark ages. And so people would give me phone numbers on little, you know, pieces of paper. And, you know, I didn't drive at the time, so I would call people and get rides to meetings. And I could not get sober. I could not get sober. And, you know, people were saying, you know, you don't have to do much, you just have to change everything. I was like, well, that's a tall order. You know, and you know, I was talking to people, and they would say things like, you show up to a meeting 15 minutes early, try to be of service, share when you're called on, get a sponsor, work the steps. And it was as if people were speaking in a foreign language. And if you are new to Alcoholics Anonymous, just learn kind of the jargon here. And what happened for me is that the slogans that we talk about really kind of came into play, because that was kind of all I could take in, you know, one day at a time, and first things first. And it seemed like this very weird, you know, bumper sticker philosophy, until I realized that I had so much going on. I just needed to keep it really, really clean and simple. So I got a woman, agreed to be my sponsor. Her name was Lisa, and she was my sponsor for, I would say, about 9 months. And I think she was really in over her head. You know, she may have sponsored before, but you know, I was just so squirrely. And we had a payphone on my high school campus. And if I was having a tough day, I would just call her from the payphone, and I would have this thought of, pretty sure I'm the only person here calling their AA sponsor. You know, anyway, she just really tried to support me, and we worked the first 3 steps together down at the beach, talked about what unmanageability looked like in terms of my drinking. And we talked a little bit about being willing to turn my will and my life over to a higher power. And when I first saw and heard the steps read out loud, I thought, that's the deal killer for me. Because, you know, prior to going to any kind of a synagogue, it just felt like spirituality or God was sort of the butt of all the jokes in my home. You know, we're very science-based. My mom was very practical. She was, despite all of her mental health problems, she was actually a psychiatric nurse of all things. And she was amazing at her job. She had the ability to connect with people so well. And I completely just lost my train of thought. Sorry. Oh, so she just, like, we didn't talk about God. It was just, you know, that was almost like a weakness. Although privately, I had always thought to myself, although I didn't believe in any kind of deity, that I could see the friends who did, it just brought them so much comfort. And it's not necessarily that I wish that I ascribed to any kind of a religion. I just really wanted some sort of a connection, you know, either with my fellows or just to know that I wasn't alone. And that was one of the most beautiful things about Alcoholics Anonymous and attending meetings as a newcomer. Was I learned very quickly that we don't do any of this alone. So Lisa would tell me, you know, okay, so we try to pray or whatever. And I just thought, this is so weird. I didn't even know where to start. And so she said, well, do you believe that I believe in a higher power? And I said, well, sure. I mean, I don't have any reason to not believe her. So she said, well, why don't you pray to my God, and then just the rest of it will sort itself out. I shared this with the meeting I was at recently, where I just like, okay, so I think this is praying, right? So I put my hands together and I said, dear Lisa's God, this is BREA. Please keep me sober today. Goodbye. And what I've come to learn is that trying to pray and meditate is still praying and meditating. Like, it looks a whole lot different for me now, but like, I'm still really wiggly and swirly, and it's very difficult for me to sit through meditation. And so what it looks like for me might be very different from somebody else, but it's in the trying, you know. My friend Darren says God loves himself a little trier. Look at BREA down there, just really giving it her all. So she turned me loose on my 4-step, and in the 4-step there is some column work. It was, excuse my language, but it was a total fucking mystery. I had no idea what she was talking about. And so, you know, we kind of talked about it, and instead of asking for help or asking for clarification or asking questions, I kind of leaned into my old drinking and using ways of just pretending I knew what she was talking about, and then I'd figure it out. And so she came to receive my 5th step, and we're sitting, you know, out kind of in the flower bed in the front of that awful house I was telling you guys about. And I had, it was basically a page front and back, and it was my story. And I was really excited about my 4-step because I thought it was when I got to lay it all out and tell my version of how I thought things went down. And when I finished, she was one of the first people in my life to actually call me out on, but in a very loving way, that, you know, this isn't what we talked about. You know, what we're looking for is a resentment inventory, a fear inventory, a sex inventory. And in all of these inventories, you're taking a look at basically what your part was in these. And she said, so I think we need to sit down and go over the material again. You know, let's, you know, let me help you do this. And I was so embarrassed that, I mean, I joke about this, but you know, it's true. Obviously I got a new sponsor. I was so horrified, right? So I got a new sponsor, and her name was Evans, and she was my sponsor for 25 years. And she moved out of Santa Barbara about maybe 10, 12 years ago. And I ended up getting a new sponsor, but I'm incredibly grateful to her. So I started the steps over with her, and she had me reading the literature. And so I would read in the big book, and then I would read the corresponding step in the 12 and 12. And we went through step 1, and it was really clear to me that my life was unmanageable. It was clear to everybody, but I didn't think that I was powerless over alcohol because I preferred drugs. And the fact about that is that the reason why I preferred drugs is because anytime I drank, every single time I drank, bad things happened. I could never predict the outcome. I could never predict how drunk I would get. Sometimes I get a little buzz off the first drink. Other times I would be insanely drunk before I even got to the party. Like, there was no rhyme or reason to it. And frankly, it scared me. Like, I was really afraid of drunk BREA. And I'll back up and say, at this point, I was 3 years sober. And I want to really distinguish between doing the steps and working a program versus the fellowship of the program. So I thought going to the meetings was working a program. Like, I just didn't really know. And also, I wasn't doing a great job at that either. You know, I would sit outside, smoke cigarettes, come inside and use the bathroom and drink coffee and, you know, disrupt the meeting. I've been kicked out of meetings. I was really into skateboarding. And I guess, you know, people seem to take offense when they're trying to listen and you're skateboarding on the stage. So they're like, wow, that's really excelling in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so Evans really taught me a lot about etiquette, not necessarily being a lady, but just, you know, in meetings, you sit down and you listen. And when the meeting's over, you thank the speaker. And ironically, that was a whole skill set that I actually ended up taking into the workplace, of thanking people for their hard work and showing up on time and making sure my work was done so I wasn't holding other people up. So when I got to the the second and third step, I had what I consider to be an understanding of just practical spirituality, of really trying to turn my will and my life over to a higher power. I didn't know what that was. And as a matter of fact, the longer I'm sober, the less I feel like I seem to be able to articulate that. But I have a friend, Karen, who says, if I can describe love, I can describe my higher power. And I mean, that's essentially how I feel. I have a sense that the universe has my back. And also about 15 years ago, my mom gave me a bracelet that says, I always believe in you. And I feel like that is really a spiritual sentiment of that what I'm doing in this moment is good enough. I'm good enough. I always have been good enough. And you know, the drugs and the alcohol really just got in the way from being the best person that I could be. So we launched on the 4th step, and I had kind of spoken a little bit about that. And you know, I worked actually out of some worksheets. So it's just basically all the column work, but it was very condensed because I'm always been sort of this raconteur and this great storyteller, embellishing the truths and all of that. And I had the tiniest line to take a look at what my resentment was. And I realized that it's not about telling my story, it's about looking at the behavior. And so that was really a revelation for me because I was in love with my story. And I was in love with being a martyr and a victim and feeling like everybody had done me wrong. And when I got it down on black and white, these resentments I had, I could see very clearly what my hand was in them. While I was sharing my 5th step with my sponsor, you know, I went on to talk about my fears, just get them down on paper, as well as a sex inventory. And I'll just say this, particularly since it's a mixed meeting, the sex inventory was a whole lot less about sex than I thought it was. It was more of the same in terms of really looking at my relationships and how I move through the world. And, you know, I had always operated from, you know, if people chose to have a relationship with me, sexual or not, and I hurt them, it was their fault for, you know, hanging out with me because I was going to do whatever I was going to do. And, you know, I have been on the receiving end of that, and it doesn't feel great. You know, I don't want to be that person anymore. I'm not that person anymore. So I'm sharing this 5th step with my sponsor, and she's sort of like Harriet the spy in the corner, just taking notes. And I'm thinking, what is she writing down? And she was just writing down some common things that come up in resentments, as well as, you know, our behaviors about being self-centered and selfish. I was very self-seeking. You know, I was things that would affect my security, either personal or financial, were really big deals for me. And I did not go into those things lightly. And so we were able to talk about what those things were, those defects of character. And I was able to turn those over. And what I found is that there are areas in my life where I feel like I've made huge progress, like these great strides. In the meantime, my life is just burning down over in this other area. And what I love about the literature is that for the 6th and 7th step of being willing to let these defects of character go, is that really what we're talking about is patient improvement. You know, I really have tried to be gentle with myself and see a lot of my humanity that I wasn't able to do before. I wasn't able to find any compassion for myself as well as other people. And that's been a really big change in my recovery. So I had talked a little bit about, you know, hearing the steps that talk about a power greater than ourselves, or God with a capital G. And I was, you know, the 4th step I was really excited to do, but it was the 8th and 9th step that I thought would break me. I was just, you know, I would rather move to avoid confrontation. I am just not that person. It's so, oh my gosh, I just was so scared to make amends to the people I'd harmed. And my sponsor and I took a look at amends that I owed financially, as well as amends that I was able to make right away, amends that I might need to wait on for any kind of particular circumstance, and then amends that I felt like I was never going to be able to make. And so I just got that all down on paper to take a look at it, and we started kind of chipping away. I loved shoplifting. I loved it. Like, I still have that intrusive thought of just take it. Just like, the beauty is that I tend, usually my first thought is not the not the best one, and so I just operate under a lot of contrary action. But I stole stuff all the time, and at the time there was a pharmacy or a little drugstore here. It's long since closed or been bought out, but it was called Thrifty's, and that's where I got all of my makeup. Where I stole all of my makeup, and because the corporation didn't exist anymore, what I ended up doing was going and buying makeup the equivalent to about what I stole and taking it over to the women's sober house here as an amends, because there was no, I couldn't pay them back the money or whatever. Anyway, but there was one amends in particular where I didn't see my part for a really long time. And it wasn't until I had sat down and done the inventory. And when I did see my part, I was horrified that I couldn't put it together. So this was the house, and we had a bunch of roommates, and one of my roommates, her mother hated me. I would walk in the room and this woman would walk out. Oftentimes, if we were in the kitchen together, she would body check me. Like, she had no problem just getting in my face. She did not like me, and I just felt like the harder I tried, the angrier she got, and I couldn't put it together of what I had done to make her so upset. And it wasn't until I had done the sex inventory and realized that she probably had some really big feelings about the fact that I had hooked up with her daughter's boyfriend. Like, I didn't put that together. Just thought, I'm just going to do what I'm going to do and whatever. And so I was very afraid of her too. She was not a very tall person, but she was absolutely terrifying, and she hated me. And so that was one of the amends that I didn't think I could ever make, because I was so embarrassed and horrified about my behavior. I had made amends to her daughter, but I don't know. It was just one of those things where I just thought I would never be able to get the courage to tell her how sorry I was for my behavior and how impactful it was and hurtful it was. So wouldn't you know it, I started seeing this woman everywhere. Like, the more I didn't want to make the amends, I'm like, there she is again. And one of the last times that I had seen her before I actually made amends, I saw her and hid. And I was like, this is not good. This is, the big book talks about how, we might not be able to get sober or stay sober if we can't rectify the past. And so of course I ran into her within 2 weeks, and I asked her if she'd be interested in coming over to my house and meeting me for coffee. And she did. And it was actually, she was very kind. And we had a really great talk. She had actually got into recovery herself in Al-Anon. And after that talk, I just felt like the weight of the world had lifted. I mean, I can't believe how long I hung on to that, and how, maybe a 20-minute conversation, I was in so much pain behind it, to finally let that go. And here's the thing about that experience for me is that I never saw her again. It's not like we became these amazing friends, or I brought her a casserole every Friday. None of that. I made amends. I asked her how I could make restitution. And then that was that. And I am free from that. And so the 9-step promises talk about, we don't regret the past, and we don't wish to shut the door on it. And I've realized that, the things that I have moved through in my life, particularly getting sober young and having long-term sobriety, is like my superpower in AA. I'm able to share those experiences with other people. And sometimes, honestly, it's a cautionary tale. I don't work the best program. I did not get sober right away. I was always raising my hand. I could not get sober. And I ended up, I think it was maybe the 5th of July, I was in Los Angeles. I ended up getting assaulted, and that was when I had that spiritual experience of knowing to a certainty I was not going to live to see my 18th birthday if I didn't get sober. And so about maybe 5 or 6 days later, I got my sobriety date of July 14th. And this is how gross and sad I was, is that I would do anything. If there wasn't alcohol, I would do anything. And the last thing I ever did before my sobriety date, so on July 13th, we didn't have any drugs, we didn't have any alcohol. And this is after going to AA meetings. I just poured, I think the UK version is Typex or something like that. We call it whiteout, but it's that liquid correction fluid. I just poured a whole bottle of it into a baggie and I huffed it. And I come out into the living room, I've got stuff all over my face. Like, everybody's like, what are you doing? I mean, I was just insane, absolutely insane. So not a very glamorous finish to my drinking and drug using, but that gives you an indication of just, you know, I would do anything. And what I found is that with drugs and alcohol being a part of my, you know, it's not so much that I was an alcoholic, it was that the drugs and the alcohol were my solution. And so when I got sober, I had no skills for living. And so by working the 12 steps with my sponsor, we moved on to step 10. And that was a really great way for me to take a look at my behavior before it became embedded in my psyche. And I felt like, you know, I couldn't make amends for something. I was too embarrassed or too ashamed or whatever. And so to promptly be able to be rid of those things, either through a conversation with my sponsor or a direct amends when it was owed, has really freed me up of a lifetime of baggage. I do go in for a regular house cleaning with my sponsor. I have worked the steps repeatedly because my experience working the steps at 3 months sober or 3 years sober is a lot different from my experience of working the steps at 13 years sober and 30 years sober. And, you know, that's just me. I know there are some people who work steps 1 through 10 and that's it. And then they move on to, 1 through 9 and that's it. And then they move on to 10, 11, and 12. But I continue working the steps just, and really honestly, I feel like when one of my sponsees is going through the literature, that's an opportunity for me to work the steps as well. But I do work really hard at this program. 11, step 11 is sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with our higher power. And again, you know, for me, I'm super squirrely. For the longest time, what meditation looked like for me was running or walking. So if my body was moving, my head was quiet. I have had sponsees who really struggle with attention deficit or hyperactivity. And so my solution for them is to sit down and color, because that kind of quiets the mind. Some people just don't have the capacity to sit and not do anything. If that's one of you, oh my gosh, you're just gonna just like teach me your ways. But for me, it's just, you know, I'll spend a few minutes in quiet reflection. You know, one of the man who took me to my first meeting, he is still sober. I see him typically about once a month online. And he's just a phenomenal person. He always, when I thank him, he's always deflecting. He said, you know, it's just what we do. But, you know, I don't know. I have so much reverence for him. So I asked him, like, what do you do to, you know, when you're meditating? And he said, well, I just think about, you know, how I can help the alcoholic who still suffers. And I didn't say anything, but I was like, could you be more of a square? What is that? And out of that, I realized, you know, I could go back to my high school and speak to the health class and tell them that I got sober in that class in 1984 when I was 16 years old. And I have had a lifetime of sobriety. And, you know, I did that and I was so grateful to pay it forward. So you just never know. That whole contempt prior to investigation is always gets me. Okay, so I'm going to just wrap up and say that what my life is like today feels like a Cinderella story, truly. I am absolutely overpaid in Alcoholics Anonymous. Since the pandemic, you know, before I would go to maybe 3 or 4 meetings a week. since the pandemic and being able to go onto Zoom, I go to a meeting a minimum of once a day. And I do that because I showed up on time for drugs and alcohol every day. I wake up with untreated alcoholism every day. So I work harder at my program today with 41 years of sobriety than I ever have. And it's because it makes me feel good, because it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to share with other people. It's a pleasure to be a better daughter and a better partner and a better parent. I have two amazing kids. They are grown and launched. After I'm done talking with you guys, I'm going with my daughter and we're going to go look at wedding rings so she can get an idea of what she wants to show to her boyfriend. And, you know, their engagement is imminent. My son is a professional musician, self-supporting, which is probably an oxymoron. But he just got done with tour and he's looking at doing a tour going on in Europe possibly, which I'm like, sign me up, I'll be your roadie so I can travel. And then the last thing I'll say is on August 12th, I celebrated 35 years of marriage. So none of that is possible without Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, I'm so tremendously grateful. And I will close with this. If you're new to AA, you don't have to do this alone and you do not have to drink and use again. I mean, please, it is so much easier to stay than it is to try to get sober again. You know, the time, it gets worse, never better. And I have seen that countless times and just had my heart broken when sponsees have relapsed or a couple of them have died. It's just awful. And if you're not new to AA, you do not have to drink to start over in Alcoholics Anonymous. That has been my experience. So very grateful to be here. Thank you all so much for having me.
Thank you so much. You've blown me out of the water. I just love being sober. That's the number one thing. And you know, you got sober at 16. I was thinking I started drinking at 12 or 13. At 17, I was looking for the answer. I was looking to stop, but I didn't know how. And stopping drinking wasn't the answer either. Because I was going to be left with me. I stopped drinking 1,000 times. So I didn't know how to get it together, or whatever it was. And I regret them years of torture that I put myself through and everybody else. But, you know, coming into Alcoholics Anonymous, the last time I came back, and it was the first time that I realized it was all my fault. It wasn't anything else, it was all my fault. And I was able to go to meetings and I could hear what was being said to me. I was lucky that a guy took me under his crutch or crutches, and he bullied me into submission. He threw the big book at me. He said, if you want to get sober, this is how you do it. If you don't want to do it this way, take your misery and get out of here. I didn't like the way he spoke. Everything in my life was in tatters and he was laughing his head off. So I done what he told me. And because I done what he told me, I have a life. I'm 36 years clean and sober. I love these recordings because I'll go back over it again and I can read-thread the whole lot. I'm sorry I didn't get it at 16. And I'm glad there was a gentleman like that that was able to reach out to you. You know, and, you know, anyone that's struggling, hang in there for one more day. That's what makes the difference. Just one day. Anyway, I've rambled on long enough. Thanks so much, BREA. Fantastic share. Mick?
Thank you. BREA, my name's Mick, and I am an alcoholic. Fantastic. When you stopped, I started. At 16, I had my first drink, and that was the solution to my life because it made me feel whole. At 29, my life was a wreck, and I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. I worked in a brewery for 40 years, 13 drinking, 27 in recovery. Doesn't make me a hero or anything, because Alcoholics Anonymous taught me that booze wasn't my problem. I was my problem. And I had to learn to change me, you know. And, I was listening to you and I was thinking, yeah, I done that. And, and I have a wonderful life through this fellowship. Sam, AA friend here, she just said to me, how long have you been married, Mick? And I would have been 56 years married. But my wife died 10 years ago. And, and before she died, she was Al-Anon for 40 years. And before she died, we were soulmates because we both learned how to work a program together. And sometimes I'd be doing a chair and she'd be doing, it was a joint chair together. And I would say the wrong thing. She would lean forward and say, Mick, I don't think it was quite like that, in front of all the people and that. And because I get it wrong. And, you said about shoplifting just now, and I thought, even now I get the feeling, of it comes in me, but then I start laughing at myself. The other day I was walking up the lane with my dog, and there's all these tools just behind this fence. And I thought, if I pull that off, I can have all them tools. And I started laughing. They weren't even tools I would use. But I can laugh at myself now. I have a good life through Alcoholics Anonymous. It is wildly beyond my dream how I am today. I can live with me today, and I never could. Never could. Thank you, BREA. It's fantastic share.
That's it. Thanks to all the co-hosts. Thanks for our lovely timekeeper, Karen. And thanks, Mick, for joining us. BREA, you've done a fantastic job. And those who've done the readings, we've to do the promises. Kath is on the promises.
Hi, I'm Kath. I'm still an alcoholic. If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We'll not regret the past or wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness, and self-pity will disappear. We'll lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize what God is doing for us, what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled amongst us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. Thanks.
Thanks, Kath. And Mick?
A reminder that our meetings are, we have a meeting on 7 days a week at 8:30 a.m. UK time. We also have a lunchtime meeting every Sunday at 1 p.m. UK time. This is a meditation meeting.
And on Saturday, 6 p.m., we have our old timers meeting, an extended share recorded for the archives. And Thursday evenings, we have a meeting at 7:30 UK time. We use the same meeting code for all our meetings.
Stick around for fellowship after the meeting. If you want a breakout room after the meeting, please let the host know.
And our yellow card, who you see here?
What you hear here,
when you leave here,
let it stay here.
That's it, folks. BREA, will you lead us out with the serenity prayer? And again, thanks a million for a fantastic share this evening.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you all so much. Thank you everybody who's doing service, and just wanted to say really quickly that Stacy, I will check in with you after the meeting. Really, really nice. I got your number. So after a moment of silence for the alcoholic who still suffers, if you would mind joining me in the us, or the we version, not the small, but the the us version. Grant us the serenity
Grant us the
Accept the
serenity
things
to
to
accept
accept
the
the
things
things
we
we cannot change,
courage
courage to change
things
things
we can,
and the
and
wisdom
wisdom
to
to
know the
know the
to know the
difference.
difference.
Thank you, Brea. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Remember
Thank you,
to-
Brea.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Bria.
Great.
Really